Hi chaps, welcome back. Okay, so we've got all bearings installed, and all I've done, I've just put a metal plate off the press in and set a DTI gauge up that it's actually running vertical, not going at an angle. It gives us wrong readings. We need to be running vertical, same plane as the crank's going to move in. Okay, so what we need to know is, we need to know now what end float in the crank we've got. So all I've done is install the crank with its shims on the other side that are in this bottom casing. Just put it in and then put the outer cover back on the top. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to use a screwdriver as a pivot force into the keyway, because I want to see, all I want to see is what end float we've got set at the minute. So we've got 0.15. I'm hoping you can see that. 0.15. Okay, that's all it is. Obviously, using that as the pivot point, we're holding the cases together. I know she's not bolted together, but believe me, that's accurate enough for that. So we've got 0.15 of end float we've got to take care of. These bearings are actually tapered bearings, slightly tapered, and they need a load putting onto them for them to seat properly. Okay, so the shims that came with it, so let me make sure see what you're seeing. The shims that are off this side that go underneath that bearing, so we can check whether it's excessive or too much or too little. There's the two shims that came off it. We know we've got 1.5 to take up, so if we're now 0.55, okay, so take the 5 off the 1.5 leaves us to the 1. We've got a 0.4, so we've got a 0.4 of a mil preload on to them bearings, and that is absolutely cock on. Okay, so 0.4 of a mil preload on the bearings is within Ducati's spec. I think it's 0.3 to 0.5, something like that. We're smack in the middle. Okay, so we don't need to muck around with shims. We're just going to literally lift this cover off, put these shims back on the end of the crank, and when the gearbox and everything's assembled, we can carry on and rebuild it. So it's just you know, a bit of a heads up on what we do, what we check. A lot don't check it, or just put it back. It feels right, but I like to check it because we can see figures, and here it is before your very eyes. Okay, thank you. So we'll pick it up on the next bit. Hi there, welcome back to Project 888. Okay, so as you can see, we're all clear, we're all clean. We've been vapor blasting, and we're just setting the bearings, the new bearings in. Good stuff, SKF stuff. Got bearing retainers to put in yet, and yeah, all clean, immaculately clean. In fact, let's just have a look round. As you can see, so we've got the seals obviously to put in yet, but yeah, all clean, all. So we're about there with this side to start assembling gearbox, cranking, check the actual, before I do anything, I'm going to actually check the crank's end float, end to end. It felt good on strip down, so it didn't feel like anything to worry about. So, but we'll just check that as it goes back together. Yeah, just, I mean, as I say, it came for this, for the bearing that's in here and in here. That one's been put in, where's the old one? Where's the old one? Where's the old one? Where's the old one? Can't find it when you're live, can you? Hey? Old bearings here, which are gearbox bearings. This, I think they're over the other side over there. But anyway, the one I want to show you, now, just let me rest that somewhere. Let me rest that, say, there. Straighten her up. Here's one of them. Here's the other. Ready? Wow. You ready? I think this is the bearing, one of the bearings. Let me just, so there's the duff one. I don't want to put that one back in, do I? There's the new one. That came out of there. Anyway, there we go. That's as it came out. So right, I'm gonna go and put this one in the freezer, and then I'm gonna get them into press, and we're gonna press this one in. Then we're gonna start actually putting the gearbox back together. And no, like I say, we're gonna do the crank and float, but then we'll get sorted. So yeah, pick it up in a minute. Okay. Okay chaps, welcome back. Now I've got all the shims etc in place, and the lower selector on the output shaft, the selector, the singular selector on the input shaft, and we're just about to literally rock them back so they engage with each other, and fingers out and onto the bearings. Okay, so can be pretty awkward that, so I mean trying to film it and move around the camera while I'm doing it can be a bit. So anyway, what we end up with now is, I wonder if we can spin that whole thing round to sort of see in the back. Let's have a look. There we go. I'll probably see a little bit better there anyway. Okay, so now what we've got is, this is the selector fork shaft, okay, for that particular one. I'm just going to test fitting it and make sure we're right. Now the selector drum itself, this little ball bearing, if you like, a little whatever you want to call it, okay, is the neutral light contact. So neutral light goes in there. So for aiming for somewhere kind of neutral, we're going to just drop this in, making sure them shims don't want to go walkies. We're going to drop that in, and she sat on the shim. None of them have gone walkies, and just 2 seconds while I make sure. Yeah, we're pretty much there. Okay, so the selector fork that's sat loose on this input shaft, I'm now going to engage it in its, for want of a better word, and is it called that? It's scroll. Okay, and when it's engaged in it, I'm going to line up the fork so we're all still a little bit out of place at the minute. So next one is we have another fork. Notice that the shims are still on the drum at this side as well. So we have another selector fork in a minute when we lift that one into the lower scroll. There we go. So that fork now is in the lower scroll, just aligning the holes up. So it's going to go in that way. So we're looking for the actual groove that the fork sits in. Okay, I can just get room, and you should be able to see this scroll here. We need to just lift it up a bit till it sits in there, and then what should happen, he says, is the pin, which it didn't, should go through just a matter of keeping it all aligned while you get the pin in. Even if you weren't on camera, there we go. So she's all gone together there now. Now that should, as it does, turn okay, because the forks have kept the gears that are trying to engage us through gravity away from each other. Okay, so we'll probably get a little bit of movement in here, I'm not sure, by moving the drum round, but I'm going to go back to where I was, and that now, and then just go that way and nod. There we go, we're pretty much somewhere in neutral now. I can spin this shaft, but not that one. Okay, so it leaves that one, so we're pretty much sat in a neutral position. So there we go, gearbox is kind of sat where we want it to be now. Okay, The crank's now sat on its correct shims, and the shims have been replaced back. The ones that we were measured before have now been back this side of the bearing, so when the case goes on, the preload on the crank is all correct setting. So now we've got our timing shaft. Now on our timing shaft, yeah, it's not in bad condition really. You can see where the bearings have been running, but you know it's an oldish engine now. So we have the keyways and we have the water pump drive on the end. So obviously the nut and the two belt pulleys go in with the two keyways when it's through, but we'll engage with the two key pulleys there. So what we've got to do for now is kind of just sit that there. Okay, so we're just going to keep him sat there, ready for the top case to come on. Obviously this bearing on this side has the shoulder, so when the nut goes on, it pulls it up to the bearing, and that's what holds it, whereas it could float through the other bearing. So this is actually held in position by the bearing that's in the other case. So I think that from there we will pick it up shortly when I get everything else organised and get everything else set. Yeah, all our shims are in place, as we can see. There was no reports of any gear change problems or etc. So if it changed gear before, alright, it'll change gear again, alright. So there we go. Yeah, we'll pick it up on the next one. Okay, so stay tuned.